The guards had never heard a sound like it before. A single crack echoing across the yard, sharp enough to stop every inmate mid-step. In the next heartbeat, a man collapsed face down on the concrete, blood spreading beneath the tattoos on his back, tattoos of barbed wire twisting into a skull. The tower lights snapped on. Officers screamed for lockdown. Inmates scattered. Nobody dared move toward the body of Colt Maddox, the man known as the Warden Breaker, the inmate who terrified even correctional staff. For Colt to drop like that, without a fight, without warning, meant something unthinkable had just happened. And then the real shock hit. Standing over him, breathing hard, hands shaking, was another inmate, Jordan Hale, the quiet one, the man who'd never thrown a punch in this prison. The tattoos that wrapped his arms, black crows with red eyes, seemed to move as the lights flashed across them. His chest rose and felt like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. The yard froze. The guards froze. Even the siren hesitated for half a second, because everyone knew the same thing at the same moment. If Jordan Hale had taken down Colt Maddox, there was no telling what would happen next. The rest of the prison's most dangerous men, for others, each one a legend in their own right, were watching from the edges of the yard, tattoos glowing under the floodlights. Eyes locked on Jordan. No one helped Colt. No one shouted. No one stepped in. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. Something had been set in motion. Something planned. Something bigger than the five of them. And the question that tore through every inmate's mind was simple. Why did Jordan Hale strike first? And who was he really aiming for? Hours earlier, before Colt Maddox hit the ground, Red Valley Penitentiary had felt strange, too calm, too quiet. Officers walking rounds kept glancing over their shoulders. Inmates whispered more than usual, passing information like it was contraband. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone could feel it. 5 of the deadliest inmates in the country were now in the same facility, and that kind of combination never exists by accident. Jordan Hale had arrived first. Lean, sharp eyes, and those crow tattoos curling down both arms. He wasn't loud. He wasn't violent. But every guard who dealt with him said the same thing. Jordan was a thinker. He studied people the way others studied maps. Then came Colt Maddox, the man who'd once fractured a warden's jaw mid-transfer. His skull tattoo was famous across the prison system. When Colt walked, guards parted like water. The third arrival was Ethan Briggs, a tall inmate with a serpent tattoo wrapped around his ribs. Ethan never smiled, never raised his voice. He was the type who could stand behind you for 10 minutes without making a sound. A week later came Vaughn Mercer, a former gang enforcer from Canada with a tattoo of a burning tower down his spine. Vaughn moved like a man who expected violence to greet him at any moment. And last was Rowdy Blake, a UK transfer built like a wall, tattoos of chains wrapped around both forearms. His reputation followed him from overseas. Rowdy didn't start fights, but he ended them brutally fast. 5 men, 5 different worlds, 5 violent histories, now locked behind the same steel doors. What unsettled the prison most wasn't their arrival. It was their silence. No fights, no arguments, no confrontations, just tension building like steam inside a sealed pipe. Jordan noticed the looks the others exchanged. Colt noticed Jordan watching him. Vaughn whispered to guards that the transfers didn't line up. Rowdy told an officer that someone out there wanted these 5 together. Ethan stayed silent, but he watched everything. The whole prison became a pressure cooker. Then the pressure snapped. It happened during evening yard time. Jordan was walking the track alone when Colt stepped in front of him. No words, no warning, just a stare that felt like a blade pressed against Jordan's throat. 3 other inmates paused nearby. Ethan turned his head. Vaughn leaned forward slightly. Rowdy stood like a statue, all waiting, all expecting something. Jordan's eyes flicked down to the ground, and that's when he saw it. A message carved into the dirt with a broken fence piece. Tonight, you're first. He didn't know who wrote it. He didn't know who it was meant for. But instinct told him one truth. Colt Maddox wasn't stepping in front of him by coincidence. Something moved in Jordan's chest. Fear? No. Resolve. He acted before Colt could blink. A single move. A single crack. And Colt Maddox, the man nobody thought could be dropped, felt like a tower losing its foundation. And the moment he hit the ground, the entire U.S. prison system felt the tremor. Because if Jordan Hale had been forced to strike first, someone must have pushed all 5 inmates toward war. Someone outside these walls. Someone who needed one of them gone. But who? And more importantly, which one of the 5 inmates wasn't supposed to leave this prison alive? Jordan didn't remember running. He only remembered the way the sirens exploded over his head as guards slammed him against the yard wall, shouting over each other, trying to cuff him while Colt Maddox lay motionless on the concrete. Floodlights swept the yard. Inmates were pushed to the ground. The air tasted like metal. Jordan kept his head down, jaw clenched. He didn't fight the guards. He didn't speak. It wasn't fear. His mind was racing too fast for fear. Whoever carved that message into the dirt wanted this moment, one of the 5 of them fighting. And Jordan knew the others were watching his every move. From the corner of his eye, he spotted Ethan Briggs standing still while officers herded him toward the fence. Ethan didn't blink, didn't flinch, just narrowed his eyes at Jordan like he was studying a puzzle only he understood. Von Mercer was farther back, breathing heavy, fists clenched like he was holding himself back from charging the guards. Rowdy Blake stood with his hands on his head, veins bulging in his forearms, eyes locked on Colt's body. None of them looked confused. None looked shocked. They looked expectant, as if this attack wasn't the beginning, but the next step in a plan that had been moving long before Jordan ever touched Colt. Guards dragged Jordan toward D-Block. Torres, the lieutenant with a scar across his cheek, shoved him into an intake room. The door slammed behind them. Torres leaned in close. "What the hell did you just do?" Jordan stared at the metal floor. "I did what I had to." "Colt Maddox isn't a nobody," Torres snapped. "He's a system problem. You don't drop a man like that unless you want a war." Jordan slowly raised his eyes. "A war already started. I just stepped into it." Torres froze. For the first time since the yard erupted, he looked genuinely worried. Before he could ask more, the radio crackled violently. "Unit 7, medical update on Maddox. He's alive. Repeat, he's alive, but unstable." Jordan closed his eyes. Alive meant the prison wasn't done shaking yet. Torres stepped back. "You're going to segregation. Now." But before the lieutenant could open the door, someone kicked it from the other side. Von Mercer burst in with 2 guards struggling to restrain him. His burning tower tattoo glistened with sweat. He was breathing like an animal that had just tasted blood. "Let me talk to him." Von roared, fighting the cuffs. "You don't want this." Torres shouted. "I don't care what I want," Von snarled, trying to break free. "Jordan needs to hear something." Jordan didn't move. He didn't even look up. Von leaned in as far as the guards allowed, voice low and shaking with fury. "You think dropping Colt makes you safe? You think that message on the ground was for you?" He paused, eyes burning. It wasn't. Jordan felt a chill crawl up his spine. Von continued. "Whoever wrote that message, whoever set this up, they want one of us gone. One specific inmate." His voice dropped lower. "And it's not Colt." Before Jordan could ask who he meant, a guard yanked Von back toward the hallway, dragging him around the corner. For a moment, the room felt too small, too quiet. Jordan's heartbeat echoed in his ears. Torres grabbed him by the arm. "You're going to seg." A deafening boom shook the entire hallway. The lights flickered. Dust fell from the vents. Someone screamed down the tier. A second explosion rattled the walls. Jordan's chest tightened. That wasn't an accident. Someone had just hit the prison from the inside. Red alarms strobed across the corridor. Officers ran in different directions, shouting codes Jordan had never heard before. Then Torres shoved Jordan toward the exit. "Move! Now!" But as the door opened, Jordan froze. Ethan Briggs was standing at the far end of the hallway, calm as still water, while chaos tore the prison apart. His serpent tattoo stretched across his ribs as he moved closer, step by slow step. The explosions hadn't startled him. The alarms didn't touch him. He was staring straight at Jordan. Jordan swallowed. "What did you do?" Ethan wiped dust off his shoulder. "Not me, but someone wants us all in motion." "Why?" Jordan asked. Ethan's lips curled into the smallest hint of a smile. Because the wrong man fell tonight. Jordan felt the floor shift beneath him. Ethan stepped closer, and whoever planned this won't stop until the right one does. Another blast shook the walls, closer this time. The prison was tearing itself open. And Jordan Hale, surrounded by alarms, smoke, and the 4 deadliest inmates in the country, finally understood something. Colt Maddox falling was only the spark. The real fire was coming. Smoke drifted through the hallway in thin gray lines, curling around the ceiling like the prison was exhaling its last breath. Officers shouted for backup. Radios screamed over each other, and the floor vibrated as another explosion hit somewhere near the laundry block. The alarms throbbed like a heartbeat that had lost control. Jordan stepped back as Ethan approached, the serpent tattoo on his ribs flexing with every breath. Torres tried to push Jordan toward the emergency stairwell, but Ethan blocked the way, calm in the middle of the chaos. "You need to listen," Ethan said. "Whoever's doing this isn't after Colt. They're after one of us." Torres grabbed for his baton. "Move or I'll—" Ethan didn't flinch. "Lieutenant, you could try, but you won't like what happens." Before Torres could swing, the intercom crackled overhead. "Lockdown failure on C-Wing. Containment breach." Those words turned Torres pale. Jordan looked up and down the corridor. "How bad is this?" Ethan didn't break eye contact. Bad enough that someone opened doors they shouldn't even know exist. A distant roar echoed through the block. Hundreds of inmates yelling, metal clanging, voices bouncing off concrete walls. The chaos was spreading like fire. Then a shadow moved at the other end of the hall. Rowdy Blake stepped out of the smoke, chains tattooed around his thick forearms glistening. His expression was hard, jaw clenched, eyes locked on Jordan and Ethan like he'd been searching for them. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just walked forward, boots crunching debris underfoot. "Someone wants blood tonight," Rowdy said. His British accent sounded colder under the alarms. "And they're not picky about whose." Behind him, Von Mercer appeared, breathing heavy, tower tattoo rising and falling with each breath. His fists were scraped, knuckles raw. "They hit the C-block control room," Von said. "Doors are open all the way to intake." Jordan's chest tightened. "So the prison's wide open." "Wider," Rowdy said. "Someone jammed the response system. Guards can't seal anything." Torres cursed under his breath. "We need to move now." But Ethan stayed still. "Moving won't help. Not until we know who the target is." "We already know," Vaughn said, stepping forward. "It's Jordan." The hallway fell silent. Smoke continued drifting. The alarms kept screaming, but the world around Jordan seemed to stop. Ethan tilted his head. "You're sure?" "Positive," Vaughn said. "Cole told me 2 days ago that someone high up on the outside wanted Jordan gone before he testified. He didn't say who, but he said the order came from someone with reach across 3 countries. Jordan felt the words hit like a punch. "I'm not testifying in anything." "That's the point," Rowdy said. "Maybe you don't know you're in someone's way." Torres clapped a hand on Jordan's shoulder. "Is this true? Are you wrapped up in some case?" Jordan stared at the floor. His heart was beating too fast. I don't know." One step closer, voice low. "Then someone thinks you do." Before Jordan could answer, a deep metallic bang echoed behind them. Not an explosion, something heavier. The slam of a steel door. All 5 men turned at the same time. At the far end of the hall, just beyond the drifting smoke, Colt Maddox stood upright. Blood dried across his skull tattoo. His nose was crooked, one eye swollen nearly shut. But he was standing, breathing alive. And he was staring directly at Jordan. Torres whispered, "That's impossible." They took him to medical. Colt wiped blood from his lip, eyes burning with something that didn't look like rage. It looked like purpose. Then he said the words that froze all 4 inmates in place. "They're coming for him right now. All of them." Jordan's breath caught in his throat. "Ooh." Colt took a step forward. Then another. The lights flickered behind him. "The whole north wing," Colt growled. "Someone paid every man with a grudge, every lifer with nothing to lose, every one of them, to make sure you don't see sunrise." Rowdy's fists tightened. Vaughn cracked his neck. Ethan whispered something Jordan couldn't hear. Torres drew his baton, breathing hard. "We need to move. They're close." Colt pointed toward the smoke-filled stairwell. "They're coming up right now." Jordan felt the floor tremble under his feet. Not from an explosion, from footsteps. Dozens of them. Fast. Getting closer. Ethan's eyes sharpened. "It's starting." Vaughn stepped forward. "Jordan, stay behind me." Rowdy clenched his fists. "No, we need to move now." But Colt Maddox didn't move at all. He just stared at Jordan with a strange expression Jordan couldn't read. Regret? Warning? Something else? Then he said quietly, "This isn't about you, Jordan. It's about who you'll expose without even knowing you're doing it." And before Jordan could ask what that meant, the hallway exploded with shouting. Inmates, dozens, charging up the stairwell, coming straight for them. The alarms kept screaming through the hallway as red lights flashed against the concrete walls. Officers were yelling codes into their radios, but the noise was almost swallowed by the chaos exploding across the unit. Leon Wolfbite. Carver stood in the middle of it all, chest rising and falling fast, the wolf tattoo across his neck seeming to snarl under the strobe of emergency lights. He looked ready to tear into the first person who touched him, guard or inmate. Behind him, Mac Doyle's fists were still clenched, so tight his knuckles were white. His tattoos, thick black prison ink climbing up his arms like barbed vines, looked darker under the alarm lights. He kept glancing around, confused, furious, pacing like a caged animal who suddenly realized the cage was shaking. The unit was seconds away from turning into something much worse. Then the steel doors at the far end slammed open and the CERT team rushed in. Full gear, shields up, forming a wall of black across the corridor. One officer shouted for everyone to get down, but no one moved. Wolfbite raised his chin like he was daring them to make the first move. Max stepped back slowly, tightening his jaw, realizing the choice was about to be forced on him. The first flash of pepper rounds cracked through the air. Inmates ducked. Others screamed. Max staggered back as one round hit the wall beside him and burst into powder. Wolfbite didn't flinch. He kept his eyes straight on the officers, breathing through the sting in the air. For a second, it looked like he might charge them, might throw himself into the line of shields and let the consequences fall where they fell. But something else was happening. From the upper tier, an inmate leaned over the railing. Jax Romero, skinny, fast, his entire back covered in a giant tattoo of a broken clock. He was one of the voices who controlled movement between blocks. His voice cut through everything. "Fall back. All of you," he shouted. "Back to your cells. Now." It was the first time the inmates hesitated. Wolfbite's eyes flicked up at Jax. They weren't friends. They weren't allies. But both men understood the same brutal truth. This wasn't the moment to die. Not here. Not like this. Not with CERT already locking the block down. Slowly, Wolfbite stepped back. Mac followed, breathing hard, chest heaving from adrenaline. Other inmates scrambled for their cells, tripping over each other as pepper rounds cracked overhead. But as Wolfbite turned, one guard, a younger officer with shaking hands, made a mistake. He rushed forward too fast, grabbing Wolfbite's shoulder, trying to shove him down. Wolfbite spun. For a split second, everything froze. His fist came up. The officer's eyes widened. Another inmate yelled a warning. But before Wolfbite struck, two CERT officers slammed him to the floor. His face hit concrete. A knee dug into his spine. Shackles snapped around his wrists. He didn't resist, but his eyes, cold, steady, never left that young officer. The block went quiet except for the alarms. Mac watched as they dragged Wolfbite away. Something in Mac's chest tightened. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling that something huge had just shifted. Something none of them could undo. The doors clanged shut behind Wolfbite, sealing him off from the block. But everyone knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Because the moment Wolfbite disappeared around the corner, Jax Romero turned toward Mac, pointed right at him from the upper tier, and shouted loud enough for the whole block to hear. "You just brought the storm on all of us." His voice echoed, swallowed by the alarms, but the meaning didn't fade. Mac felt the eyes of the whole unit turn on him, and he realized he wasn't walking back to his cell alone tonight. Something dark was coming for him. something that had started the moment Wolfbite hit the floor, and whatever it was already moving down the tier. The alarms were still screaming when Wolfbite Carver stood in the middle of the block like he owned it. Red lights flashed across his wolf neck tattoo as inmates backed away, knowing this man could break someone's spine with his bare hands. Behind him, Mac Doyle, thick ink up both arms, looked lost between fear and rage. The unit felt like it was cracking open. Then the steel doors burst wide, and Cert rushed in with shields up. Pepper rounds exploded against the walls. Some inmates dropped. Others ran. Wolfbite didn't move. He stared at the officers like he wanted them to take the first swing. But the block shifted when Jax Romero shouted from the top tier to fall back. For the first time, inmates hesitated. Wolfbite finally stepped back. Mac followed. Everything should have cooled down until a nervous guard grabbed Wolfbite too hard from behind. Wolfbite spun on instinct, but before he could swing, Cert slammed him into the concrete. Shackles locked around his wrists. His eyes stayed fixed on the young officer who touched him. That stare alone felt like a death sentence. They dragged Wolfbite out as the alarms still echoed. When the doors slammed behind him, Jax pointed straight at Mac and yelled that he'd brought the storm down on everyone. The whole block looked at Mac like he'd lit the match himself. And deep in his gut, Mac felt something closing in. Something he couldn't outrun. It didn't start with Wolfbite. It began years earlier when Mac first landed inside with no allies and no sense of the politics these places breathe on. Wolfbite saw that weakness and pulled him in, half mentorship, half ownership. Mac learned the rules, the codes, and the price of breaking them. By the time he understood Wolfbite's grip on him, it was already too late. But Mac had changed. He became stronger, sharper, deadly in ways he never imagined. His tattoos grew as the years went on, inked symbols of choices he couldn't take back. Still, part of him wanted out of Wolfbite's shadow. That small rebellion, that tiny spark was exactly what set off the fight that led to this night. Now the block was locked down. Officers shouted orders. Inmates whispered threats. Mac walked back toward his cell, but he could hear footsteps behind him. Slow, steady, deliberate. Someone had already marked him. Someone wanted him gone before Wolfbite returned from segregation. Mac stepped into his dark cell, the air heavy, the tension thicker than the steel bars. A shadow moved at the back of the room. Not Jax, not an officer, someone worse. The door slid shut behind him, and the figure whispered, "You should have stayed under Wolfbite." Everything went silent, and the storm finally arrived.